programming languages all have built-in data structures, but they often differ from one language to another. In this video, we will look at the built-in data structures in JavaScript. In JavaScript, data types are how we define the kind of value that a variable can hold. Understanding data types helps us store, manipulate, and interact with data in our code. JavaScript divides data types into two main categories. We have the primitive types and the non-primitive types. Primitive types are the most basic data types and they are immutable, meaning that their values cannot be altered directly. These primitive types are stored directly on the stack. In JavaScript, we have what we call the stack and the heap. And these are the two areas in memory where data is stored. We will look into this in details later. But primitive data types are stored directly on the stack. JavaScript has 7 primitive types. We have the numbers, strings, booleans, null, undefined, BigInt, and symbol. Every other type in JavaScript are what we call the non-primitive type. And these are basically objects, okay? Non-primitive types are the complex types that allow us to store multiple values. The primary non-primitive type in JavaScript is the object. This includes arrays, functions, classes, and many more. Hence, in JavaScript, we have 8 types, 7 primitive types, and objects. JavaScript is a dynamic language with dynamic types. This means that variables in JavaScript are not directly associated with any particular value type. So any variable can be assigned and reassigned values of all types. Let's start by diving into strings, one of the most commonly used data types in JavaScript. Remember, this is where we stopped in the introductory video. Right here, I'm going to create a file which I'm going to call datatypes.js. Now, in our HTML file, instead of script.js, let's change this to datatype.js. And let's save this file. So, what is a string in JavaScript? A string is simply a sequence of characters like letters, numbers, or symbols. We simply use strings to represent text in JavaScript. You can create a string by enclosing your text in single quotes, double quotes, or backticks. Let's see this in action. For example, let username equal to J-GraceCoder. This here is simply a string value. So console.log username gives us J-GraceCoder. But all primitive types can be tested using an operator. JavaScript gives us access to an operator known as the type of operator. So we can say console.log type of username. Okay, and when you save this file, we should get string. You see that the type of this username is a string. So this here is a valid string. Let's create another one. Let's say message. And here, let's use the double quotes. And let's say welcome to my page. Now, let's check console.log type of message. You see, this gives us string. So this also is a valid string. And we can also use the backticks. So let's say first name is equal to, so we can use this sign, Grace. Now console.log first name, and also let's console.log type of first name. Okay, now we have Grace and it is of type string. Hence, this also is a valid string. So it's either you use a single quote or backticks, also known as template literals. Using backticks allows us to embed variables and expressions directly inside strings. Okay, we will see the usefulness of this very soon. One very important thing to note is that when you create a string using single quotes, it must start and end with single quotes, okay? It must start and end with the same quotes. So if you are using single quotes, here must be single and here should also be single. And same here, it must be double quotes, double quotes. So I cannot do something like const Bob and close this with single quotes. No, this here is wrong. Okay. So you must start with either single quotes and end with single quotes or backticks and also end with backticks. Okay. Next, let's look at string concatenation. This simply means joining two or more strings together. So we can say let's full greeting be equal to, so we have our message. Now we want to join this message and the username together. So we want to say something like, welcome to my page, J-GraceCoder. We simply do that using this plus operator. So here we say message plus username. Okay. And console.log full greeting. Remember, this is a string, full greeting, and let's save this file. Now we have welcome to my page, J-GraceCoder. Note that this space here is actually ignored, okay? After welcome to my page, there is no space between the message and the username. So to add a space, we could simply use quotes, either single quotes or double quotes, okay? Now add an empty space and also you have to concatenate this and save this file. Now we should have welcome to my page, J-GraceCoder. Okay. The space here is the one we have here. If you remove this and save this, you see no more space. So you must add the space there. Perfect. Now let's check the type of this full name. So we console.log type of full name, and you see this also is a string. So this is one way in which we can join two strings together. We can also do concatenation using our template literal. Okay, so let's say concatenation using backticks, also known as the template literals. And for this, we simply say full name is equal to, we add our backticks, and here we can embed our variable. And we do so using the $sign, open and close curly brackets. So in here, we can simply say message, okay? So we can enter this message, and here we don't need to add plus. We simply use the space. Also, let's embed our username. Now let's close this. We can uncheck console.log full greeting. That's on line 22. Now we have welcome to my page, J-GraceCoder, on line 22. And you see the beauty. Note this space here. We don't need the plus, neither do we need this extra quote. So you see how simple we can create string using template literal. We can also do something like let's new message be equal to, so let's use the template literal. Let's say hello JavaScript from username. But here we don't want to use a static text username. Okay, we want to use the username we defined, because now when you do console.log new message, here we should have hello JavaScript from username. Now we want to use the username we defined before. So we can simply embed that. Okay, so we embed that, remember, using the $sign, opening and closing curly brackets. And here you enter the variable name, which in this case is the username. Now we should have hello JavaScript from J-GraceCoder. Okay. Here we see the usefulness of this backtick. Actually, it makes our life easier because here, if we use the single quotes or the double quote, we'll be doing something like new message is equal to JavaScript from, then we need to add plus space, another plus, then username. Okay. You see that this actually is simpler. So we don't have to introduce additional operators or additional quotes. Okay. So this is more clear and easy to read. Now let's look at how we can escape characters. So let's say escaping, for example, let's say let quotes be equal to knowledge is power. Okay. Now console.log quotes. What if I want this text to be in a single quote? Okay. If I do something like this, I'm definitely going to get an error, as you see. So this cannot work. How do we do this? We simply need to escape this character using the backslash. So we do the same thing here. Okay, so we use this to simply escape this character. We now have this code just the way we want it. Okay, so this is how we can escape characters in JavaScript. We can also achieve the same thing here. Since we want a single quote here, we can remove this backslash. Instead of curating the string using single quote, we simply use double quotes. So let's remove this here and let's remove the single quote and enclose it in double quotes and save this file. We still get the same thing. Let's see how we can create multi-line strings. So let's say, let's my info, hello friend, welcome back to my page. Hence, now I want hello friend to be on a single line, welcome back to my page to be on a single line, and thanks to be on a single line. Let's see what we have when we save this file. When we save this file, console.log my info, and of course, we see hello friend, welcome back to my page, thanks on a single line. But now we want this to be on a different line. So we can do this using the backslash n. Okay. When you save this now, you see hello friend is now on a single line. Let's also do the same here. We can use the backslash n and save this file. Here we now have hello friend, welcome back to my page, thanks. Now we can also do the same thing using backticks. So we can say my info is equal to, and to use backticks, we simply start, so we leave the line, okay? We simply have to create each of those things, okay? And here you see we have the same thing, okay? We have exactly what we had here. So you can create a multi-line either by using single quote or double quote, but introducing this slash n, or by using the backticks, okay? Now let's look at some strings properties. So every string has a property called length. For instance, we can check the length of this string, okay? Here, let's say string length, my info length should be equal to my info dot length. So we simply have the length property, my info dot length. So let's see the value, console.log my info length. This gives us 45. So when you count these letters, you simply have 45. Now let's define another one. So let's say let friend name be equal to beauty. Okay, so now we can check beauty.length. That will be friend name dot length. Okay, and this should give us 6. So we can simply confirm this by counting this. So that's how we can simply check the length of a string. Now, next, let's look at how we can access string characters. So let's define a string. Let's say code is equal to, let's say 423, and save this file. Now, do not be confused. I actually use this example intentionally. This here, even if 4 to 3 is a number, since it is inside a quote like this, it is a string. Okay, so in JavaScript, we see this as a string. We can confirm this by checking the type of. You see, here we have string. It is not a number. Okay, now let's see how we can access string characters. For instance, if I want to access 4, just 4, and not 4 to 3, how do I do that? So let's say console.log, and we can do this using code at, okay. If I want to access 4, I will use code at 0, and I'm going to save this file. Here you see 4. Now you wonder why I use 0 here. Why not 1? Okay, because this is the first one. So this should be 1, and this should be at 2. This should be 3. Here I use 0, and it is correct because the values are 0 indexed. In JavaScript, these values, okay, these string values are 0 indexed. We'll look at this more when we get to array. What you should know is that the index of 4 here is 0. So the values are 0 indexed. So if I want to access 2, now I can say console.log at 1. And that should give me what? That should give me 2. And if you put 2 here, the value should change to 3. Perfect. Let's also check console.log. So here we have friend name. Let's say friend name 5 and save this file. We get Y. Now let's check this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 actually is T. Remember, this is because it is 0 index. So you have to count B as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I hope you get this. Please do not forget this because for beginners, this concept is always confusing. Please do not forget this. Now, a question that should actually come to your mind is what happens if I'm trying to access a value that does not exist? For instance, when we change 5 to 9, we should actually get undefined. So let's save this. Here you see undefined. This is because we are trying to access a particular character that is not defined. Okay. Next, let's see how we can find a substring. Okay, so let's say finding a substring. To explain this, let's create and initialize a variable. Let's call it current message. And let's say JavaScript is awesome. So we can console.log current message dot include JavaScript. Now let's save this file. And here we get true. Here we are checking if this string is actually present in the string we have here. Okay, so we are checking if this substring is part of this complete string. And truly, JavaScript is included here. Now, what happens if we change this capital letter to small letter? Remember, this is case sensitive because in this case, we are going to get false. So when you save this file, you get false. Why? Because JavaScript, small letter is not here. What we have here is JavaScript. But then if you include it here, JavaScript with small letter and save this file, you simply get true. Okay, so let's remove this. Now let's also change this. Let's check if awesome is included. We get true. So basically, we can check if a string includes another string using the includes method. We will understand what a method is as we progress with the series. We can also check the location or the index of each of these words. So we can say console.log. So we say current message dot index of. So let's say awesome and save this file. And here we have 14, which is correct because when you count this, including the space, and you will actually see that the first occurrence of this awesome is 14. Okay. So we can also check the index of JavaScript. So current message dot index of JavaScript, and that actually should give us 0. And here you see we have 0. Perfect. Now, what happens if we try to access the index of a word that does not exist? So let's say current message dot index of, let's say, Grace. Okay. Since Grace does not exist in this current message, we should actually get -1. So the index of whatsoever that is not part of the string is simply -1, just as we see in the console. Now we are going to move to the next data type in JavaScript. But before we do that, I would like to take you to the documentation. If you want to be very good in JavaScript, you must be good at reading the documentation. And I will always recommend the MDN. So you can simply come to your web browser and type JavaScript, put MDN. It gives you everything you need to know about JavaScript. Okay. So you can actually search for anything in this documentation and you'll be able to see good explanation on every topic we are going to be discussing. So here I have opened the JavaScript data types and data structure. You can read more about this topic. Okay. So you see the primitive types, you see the list of the primitive types. Okay. So please spend some time going through this documentation. I will advise that whenever you finish a particular part of the video, come to the documentation and try and check what we did in the video. Try to read it again and practice more and more will make you a very good developer. I'm going to create a folder. Let's call this JS data type. Okay, and let's move this file inside this folder. Okay, so now we have the data types inside this JS data type. So since this is much for now, let's create another file and let's call it data types file2.js. Okay, perfect. Now let's go to our index.html. We can now remove this, and this should go to this folder. Inside this folder, let's access the second file and save this. Okay. So let's now go to our data types file2. Let's look at number type in JavaScript. In JavaScript, there is only one type of number for all kinds of numeric values, whether they are whole numbers or decimal numbers. Unlike C# or Java, we have integers defined separately. We have decimal numbers and we have many other kinds of number. But in JavaScript, both whole numbers, decimal number, or any type of number at all, they all have one type, which is type number. Let age be equal to 27. Okay. So when we console.log age, now we have 27. Now let's check the type of age. Okay. And that should give us number. Great. Now let's create another one. So let this count be equal to 0.001. Console.log this count gives us 0.001, and let's check the type of this count, and that gives us number. So you see both integer or decimal number, they all have the same type. Let's look at another example. So let's say const my savings is equal to 9400000. Now let's console.log my savings. We have 940000. Now what happens if we keep adding 0 here and save this file? Now you see these dots here. Okay, you see these 3 dots here. And let's see what this means. It is very important you understand your data structures and how JavaScript is going to store your values right from now. Okay. So if you look at what we have here, numeric literals with absolute values equal to 2 raised to power 53 or greater are too large to be represented accurately as integers. Well, since this is too large for JavaScript to represent as integer, JavaScript is going to store this as double precision floating point. Anyways, we don't have to confuse ourselves here. The simple explanation to this is that JavaScript has a limit, okay? JavaScript has a range for both integers and decimal numbers. Okay, so we can actually check the maximum saved integer that JavaScript can actually store for us as an integer using what we call the mass save integer. Okay, mass save integer. So let's check this console.log number dot max save integer. And you see, this is the mass save integer that JavaScript can actually store for us. So anything that is bigger than this, JavaScript is going to store it as a double precision floating point number. We also have the minimum integer that JavaScript can actually hold. So number dot minimum save integer, which is actually this, the negative of this. Now, look at how we assess this number. The question is, where is this number coming from? And we are going to look into this very soon. For now, just know that every primitive type actually has an object wrapper. This is too much for you now because at this stage, we've not looked at what an object is. Okay, so I only introduced this just to show you that there is a limit to the size of number JavaScript can hold as number. Okay, and because of that, we have what we call the BigInt data type. Okay, remember we have the 7 primitive data types. So we also have what we call BigInt, which handle numbers larger than the maximum saved integer. So anything larger than this maximum saved integer, for instance, what we tried doing here, we can actually do this using the BigInt. Okay, and this is very, very simple. So let's now remove this and put it here. So instead of leaving it like this, let's now use the BigInt. Okay, so we have the BigInt. Okay, and now let's put this number and save it. Okay, now if you look at the console, we now have our number and you see n showing that this actually is a BigInt. So we can also create a BigInt. So let's say new savings equal to, let's put our number, but now let's put n at the back. Now, if you look at this, look at the 3 dots here, the complaint, okay, the error actually. Now, if you put that n, the 3 dots leaves, and this shows that what you defined here is actually correct. Okay, so now instead of defining it just like the normal number, we now use the new JavaScript BigInt. Okay, so let's add a comment here and let's add BigInt. Perfect. So when you are handling numbers in JavaScript that is bigger than this particular number, you can actually use the BigInt. Now, apart from the mass save integer and min save integer, we also have what we call the mass value and the min value. So we can actually check this. So console.log number.mass value. Okay, so line 11, we have this. This is the mass floating point number that JavaScript can take. Let's also check the minimum. So console.log number.min value. Okay, and now we also have this on line 12. You now see the mean value. Perfect. So let's check the type of my savings. And now you see we have BigInt and no longer number. Okay, so let's also check the type of new savings. And we also have BigInt. Perfect. Remember, in mathematics, we have infinity and we also have the negative infinity. Now, what happens if we try assessing value like, remember in mathematics, 1 divided by 0 or anything divided by 0 actually gives us infinity. And in JavaScript, it is actually correct. So here you see infinity. Now, if you do console.log, let's say minus 100 divided by 0, and this should give us minus infinity. Okay. So these are special numeric values. Okay, so infinity, let's classify this under special numeric values. Okay, so the next special numerical value we want to look at is what we call not a number. So in JavaScript, we have something like this. So it is NaN, it's like this. For instance, if you try to access, let's say console.log, let's say 0 divided by 0, here you see that this is not a number. Okay. Now let's also see something like console. Okay, so let's say console.log. Now let's take a string called hello and let's divide this string by a number. Let's say 4 and save this file. We also get not a number. This is not a number because we are trying to perform a mathematical operation with a non-numeric value. This actually is very important to understand because in your life as a programmer, sometimes you get this not a number, you get an error involving this not a number, and you might not understand where this is coming from. So now it is important for you to understand that whenever you try to perform a mathematical operation with a non-numeric value, you actually get not a number. Okay, and remember the type of, so let's say, so type of not a number, for instance, 0/0 should actually give us not a number. Okay, so when you check the type of not a number, it will definitely give you not a number. So type of NaN, okay, this actually gives us not a number. Okay, so these are special numeric values. Next, let's look at Boolean values in JavaScript. Okay, so here we say Boolean. Now, the question is, what is a Boolean? A Boolean is a data type that has only two possible values, okay? True and false. So these are the only two possible values. Booleans are often used in conditions and comparison. In programming, Boolean are at the heart of decision making. They are essential when you want your code to perform different actions based on certain conditions. Okay, so we will see this in practice. But in general, we can define a Boolean. So I want to check if a user is logged into our application or not. So let's say is logged in is equal to false. And now we can console.log is logged in, and this actually gives us false. Line 37, and we have false here. Okay, now let's check the type of is logged in, and that should give us Boolean. So you see, this is Boolean type. Let's set is logged in. Now let's assume now the user is logged into our app. Now the user is logged into our app, so this should be true. Now let's console.log is logged in, and that should give us true. Let's also check the type of is logged in, and that should give us Boolean. But we'll see Boolean values in action when we actually get to comparison or looking at operators or conditional statements in JavaScript. So for now, let's stick to this. Okay. Let's look at undefined in JavaScript. Okay, so let's look at undefined. And we are basically going to look at undefined and null. Okay, so let's look at these two data types together. Undefined in JavaScript represents a variable that has been declared but not assigned a value. Okay, so we have a variable that has been declared but not assigned a value. For instance, if we say let secret code, we defined this variable, but we've not assigned any value to this variable. So if we do console.log secret code, we simply get undefined. So undefined represents a variable that has been declared but not assigned a value. It's as simple as that. A JavaScript way of saying this variable exists, but we don't yet know what it is. Okay. So JavaScript here is telling us, oh, yes, secret code exists, but we don't know what the value is. So in JavaScript, we could see undefined whenever we have a variable that we are yet to assign a value. We can see undefined in missing function parameters. When we get to functions or objects, we actually see more about this. Now let's console.log type of secret code, and this also gives us undefined. Okay, perfect. Now next, let's look at null. Null is an intentional absence of any value. So null is simply a value that you can assign to a variable to show that that variable is empty or has no value. This actually is a common interview question. What is the difference between null and undefined? Why undefined is not intentional, okay? Null is simply intentional. Developer can assign a null value to a particular variable. For instance, I can say let current user be equal to null. Simple. Okay. This is intentional. I defined this myself. Okay. And this means that the current user has no value. It has no value. It is empty. So if you do console.log current user, that simply should give you null. But something strange in JavaScript, okay, when we do type of null, that is the only primitive type that when we do the type of, it actually gives us an object. So type of null actually gives an object and not null. Okay, this is actually a strange behavior in JavaScript. Okay, now let's go to the documentation. And in the documentation, you see that why null indicates the absence of an object. Okay, null indicates the absence of an object, which could also make up an excuse for type of null equals an object. This is actually the only primitive type that we're having some issues with the type of. Okay, so the type of null is supposed to be null, but in JavaScript, it is an object. Okay, so you can read more about this argument in the documentation. But the take home is to simply understand the context of null and undefined. So when we talk about null and undefined in JavaScript, you are able to differentiate between the two. Okay, so the type of null is simply an object. The type of undefined is an undefined. Null is an intentional absence, okay? Intentional absence of a value, and undefined is actually unassigned or not present, okay? So undefined is not intentional. Now, for null, developers actually set that, okay? I can set a variable to null, okay? But undefined usually is actually automatic. And the common use case we've seen is we can explicitly assign an empty value to a variable, and an uninitialized variable or missing value result to what? Undefined. I hope this table actually helps you differentiate between null and undefined, because this is always a common question. Next, let's look at symbol in JavaScript. Okay, so this is a primitive data type that is introduced in ES6 in the ECMAScript 2015. The symbol was introduced. So every symbol value is actually unique and of course immutable. Remember that the primitive data type are immutable. We cannot directly change their values. We'll understand the concept of immutability very soon. And they are most useful for creating unique property keys. When we get to objects, we actually see a more use case of symbol. So I don't want us to waste any time, but I'm going to show you a simple way of creating symbol in JavaScript. So we can say, let my symbol be equal to, so we create this using symbol. So we simply call the method this way. And let's see console.log, my unique code, we have this symbol. Now let's check the type of my unique code. We see symbol. Okay. Now, one thing to note here is that each time you create a symbol, it is unique, even if you pass the same description. Okay. So we can do this. Let my ID be equal to, so let's use symbol, and here let's pass ID, and let's do the same thing. My second ID be equal to this. Here we pass the same description. Now let's check if these two are equal. So console.log, my ID equals my second ID. Okay, so here we see false. For now, I don't want to waste time here because we've not even seen the use case of this check I'm doing here. So what is this double equal sign? We don't know for now, but I just want to show us the simple way we can actually create a symbol and also prove that symbols are actually unique. So we'll see more use case of symbol in JavaScript. Now, let's look at non-primitive data types in JavaScript. And the first one, remember we said every other data type are what we call objects, okay? So apart from the 7 primitive types, every other data types are objects. In JavaScript, we define an object as a collection of key value pairs. Each key, also called an attribute or a property, has a value associated with it, okay, which can be of any data type. Now, let's look at this before we go into the explanation. Let's see how we can create an object in JavaScript. So, for example, we can say, so we simply use the keyword let's create an object called person. So we can simply create this object using the object literal. Here we simply use the curly brackets, and now we can simply write the name. Okay, so let's say the name is equal to Grace. Then next, let's say age is 27. Now it is very important to use comma here. Okay, so here we put comma to write the next one is a developer. Here, let's say true. Now let's console.log person and save this. So we now have this. Okay, this is the object. We have the name is developer true, and we have the age to be 27. Now let's check the type of person. You simply see object. Okay, the type of person is object. So let's add a comment here and let's call this object. Okay, so we say that an object is a collection of key value pairs. So these are the keys. Okay, so we have the name, the age is a developer. These are the keys. And here is the value. For the name, the value is Grace. For the age, the value is 27. Okay, this key is also called the property or attribute. Okay, we can also call this the property or attribute. And each of these key has a value associated with it. So we have the key name, it has a value Grace, which is a string associated with it. So this value could be anything. The value could be another object. For instance, I cannot add my info. Okay, this could be another object to be 60,000. Okay, so you see This also is valid. Okay, now we have an object inside an object. So this here is the key. So the key can be anything. So the key could be anything: an object, a boolean, a number, or a string. Okay, so for simplicity, for now, let's remove this. So now we have our object, which is simply a collection of key value pairs. Next, let's see how we can access an object property. Okay, remember we said this is the key, also known as the attribute or the property. Okay, so we can access object properties in two ways. So first, we have what we call the dot notation, and we also have what we call the bracket notation. First, let's look at how we can access the property using the dot notation. So let's say console.log person. To use the dot notation, you simply write the name of the object, then dots. Okay, so now you can access all the properties. For instance, if you say .h and save this, that should give you 27. Okay, so we can also say console.log person dot, you can access any of those properties and save this, you get true. Next, let's look at how we can do that using the bracket notation. So let's add this comment here. So we say console.log. To use the bracket notation, simply write the name of the object. So in this case, we have person, then use the square brackets, and in here you can now say, you can now use a quote, either single quote or double quote, to now access any of the properties. So let's say name and save this file, you get Grace. To access the age, we simply say console.log person then age. Okay, and we get 27. We can also modify an object. So we can add a new property. For instance, we can say person dot last name is equal to Bob and save this. So now if you console.log the same object, so let's check person, you now have a new property with its value. Okay, now we have last name as Bob. Perfect. Now we can also change the value. So initially we already have age. So let's reset the age to, let's say, 25 and save this file. Now let's console.log person, and now let's check the age. So here we see 25 instead of 27. Now let's see how we can delete a property from an object. Okay, so deleting properties. And to delete property from an object, we simply use the keyword delete. And here we can delete person dot is a developer. Okay. Now let's console.log person. And now we no longer see is a developer. So we only have last name, age, and name. Let's also delete person dot age and save this file. Now let's console.log person. We now see only name and last name. I hope you understand this, and please go to the documentation and check everything we've done in this session. We are going to look at each of these data types in details, and we are going to see how JavaScript actually store primitive data type, in which I told you that JavaScript actually store primitive data type in the stack. So we are going to see the difference between stack and heap, because I truly want you to understand data structure. If you are a student or a developer or an anticipating developer, in any case, I really want you to understand JavaScript and how things works in JavaScript. Okay. In summary, in this part, we explored JavaScript data types. We looked at the two main categories, which are the primitives and objects. And we saw that we have 7 primitive data types in JavaScript, so that every other data types are objects. Basically, we have 8 data types in JavaScript 7 primitives, and objects. We also saw that JavaScript is a dynamic language. Okay, so we can declare a variable and initialize a value of type number and reassign a string to the same variable. This is possible in JavaScript. We are going to see the advantage of this and also the disadvantage of this. Thank you for being part of the fundamentals of data structures in JavaScript. Please do not forget to like, drop a comment, and subscribe to this channel. One love.